So today I am giving my review of a new memoir that just came out this November, Bottom of the Pyramid, a memoir of persevering, dancing for myself, and starring in my own life by Sioux. I'll give some background on the author because I know that some people, such as my regular viewers, may not be very familiar with her or who she is. So Sioux was one of the original students on the reality TV show Dance Moms. She was on the show from seasons 1 through 7, so most of the show's duration. She was an original cast member and was the cast member to be on the show for the longest amount of time. When she started the show, she was 9 years old, and when she left, she was 16. Now at the age of 24, Nia has recently published a book talking about her experiences on the show and what she has learned since then and what her life has been like since then. So I'll give a bit of my history with Dance Moms. I used to take dance classes myself, though my experience was nothing like that show. I only ever took dance classes recreationally, not competitively, so I can't relate to a lot of things in this book. But one of the things I liked about this book is it did remind me of some of my dance memories. Anyway, as a teenager, I had a girl in my dance class recommend the show to me. I'd heard of it, but I'd never watched it, so I have not watched all of it. I've seen some of it, though. I'm familiar enough with it, especially with the original cast members, and I still follow many of them on social media. When this book was announced, I instantly added it to my TBR. I was like, yeah, I would definitely like to read that. I think it's especially interesting to get the perspective of someone who was on a reality TV show, because those are very heavily edited and things can appear to be a certain way when they weren't. And I think it's really interesting to get the behind the scenes perspective of someone who was actually there and to learn what actually happened, especially when they experienced it as a child, because I think that that was explored quite a bit in this book of how that can affect someone. Some of the other cast members on Dance Moms have also written books. I have read Chloe Lukasiak's book. I read that a few years ago. I have not read any of the others, though I do think I would like to read Maddie Ziegler's memoir, The Maddie Diaries. That book is available for me through Libby, so I think that'll be one of the first books I read in 2026. I listened to the audiobook of this, which is narrated by Nia herself, and Chloe wrote the foreword for this book and read it in the audiobook as well. Dance Moms is very popular. Even if you haven't watched it, you've probably seen stuff about it, especially if you're on Instagram. There are often clips and memes from it. Nia says in the book that the show was broadcast in over 100 countries. Nia said that she wanted to do a book specifically to finally tell her story. She wanted to tell her own story in her own words on her own terms. Especially, like I said, after being on a reality show where things can be twisted. So I'll explain what the title means, because I think it's a pretty good title that she chose, and it has a lot of significance to her story and just her life in general, because the show did take up a lot of her life. So Bottom of the Pyramid refers to the pyramid that was done on the show, which was something that I believe was done in every episode, where the students, I'll just say the girls, I think there was at least one boy on the show at one point, but not in the original cast, so for this I'll just be saying the girls were ranked based on their performance from the previous week. At the bottom would be whoever the teacher thought performed the worst, and at the top would be whoever she thought performed the best. If someone was at the top, they were more likely to have a solo that week that they would perform and compete with. Basically, they would get more opportunities, and they were praised for their previous performance. I don't know the exact statistics, but Nia was very often at the bottom, which of course messed with her self-esteem, especially doing that to a child. Overall, a lot of things about the show were a very toxic environment for a child, and Nia definitely goes into that here. She talks about how your pyramid placement affected a lot of things, especially because it was on a TV show, so there were a lot of people who perhaps thought that Nia was one of the weaker dancers. In my opinion, they were all very good and all did things that I could not do. Like, I did take dance classes, but it was never on like a very professional level, and they all are very good dancers in my opinion. However, Nia also talks about how she reframed her idea of the pyramid and talked about how if you are at the bottom or in the back of a dance, that can be a good thing too. She had to reframe her thinking about a lot of things, and she goes into that here. She talks about a lot of things she was taught and the way she was treated and what she has learned since then. I was especially excited to read a book from Nia because I think that she has a pretty confident, positive personality. Like, I remember a few years ago, I'd watched some of the girls' YouTube channels and they would react to old episodes and their old performances. And it's understandable when you watch an older video of yourself and you think that it might be kind of embarrassing. And the others were typically more embarrassed, which is completely understandable, but Nia was a lot more confident and seems to just know who she is. Not that the others don't. I'm just saying I remember that. Like, she wasn't really embarrassed by her old self. She was proud of her and liked watching herself. At the start of the show, Nia and her mother Holly were the only Black cast members on the show, so Nia talks a lot about that and how that affected things and how she was treated as a result of that. There were eventually other Black cast members on the show, but at the very beginning it was just them. The dance studio that Nia attended, the Abbey Lee Dance Company, has quite a good reputation, and many famous and successful dancers started there. Nia started dancing there when she was quite young, I think 3 years old, And she was actually a part of the dance studio before the show started. Like, some people later on would come to the studio to try to get on the show. She was already at the studio, and she and her mom auditioned to be on the show, and they ended up on there. Some of the most notable people to have come from that studio include Maddie Ziegler and JoJo Siwa, who were on the show as well. So this book goes over a lot of things in Nia's life. Talks about her childhood before the show, because she started the show when she was 9, so there was a little bit of time before that started, and her life wasn't really normal for a while. She talks about the start of her dance days at the ALDC before the show and how they got onto the show, and she talks a lot about the show itself. That's a big focus of this book, of course. She talks a lot about filming the show and how that affected her personal life, like going to school and her life with her family. She talks about the dance classes and competitions, because on the show they had classes, but each week they would be going to a competition, so it would be about them learning their dances for that, and then they'd go to the competition and the show would feature that. It talks about her relationships with some of the people on the show, such as her dance instructor, Abby Lee Miller, who is known as the main teacher on Dance Moms. She also talks about her relationship with some of the other girls on the show. She talks about a lot of behind-the-scenes instances, some of which never made it to the show, or some of which were edited to look a certain way, but they actually were a different way, and so she tells those stories. Those were pretty interesting to hear. But she talks about a lot more than just her dance days and her time on Dance Moms. She also talks about her music career. She talks about her experience with acting. She is an actress as well. She's done quite a few different forms of art and has had different jobs. I will say that this book does contain spoilers for the TV show The Bold and the Beautiful. In case that by any chance applies to you, she does mention some things about that show that I would say are pretty significant. She talks about how strict the dance studio was and how she was treated there and how that affected her. She also talks about why she and her mom stayed on the show for so long, which is probably people's biggest question, because they don't understand why they stayed so long in a toxic environment. She talks about the exclusion that she faced by the other girls, by the teacher, just on the show in general. There were quite a few instances of that. She also talks about her relationship with her mom. Of course, there's quite a focus on that because her mom was who she was featured on the show with. She was with her for her time on the show. Eventually, the studio relocated to Los Angeles, but I believe they still lived in Pittsburgh. And so she and her mom would travel to Los Angeles for the filming. Nia also has her father and her 2 brothers, and her relationship with them was, I guess, like, they didn't spend as much time together back then. And like I said, the book does talk about how the filming of the show affected her relationships, but she definitely spent the most time with her mom back then. While Nia talks about her experiences on the show and how she felt about a lot of things, she also talks about how her mom handled a lot of things on the show and how she admired that. As I said, she talks about her music and acting career. She talks about some of the other many opportunities she's had and other things she has done in her career. But it doesn't end with the end of the show. She also talks about her life after the show, because at this point it's been a few years since she was on it. She talks about her experience with going to college. She talks about some things that are important to her, like her part in participating in voter advocacy. She talks about her thoughts on social media and her experience with using it and connecting with fans. She talks about a lot of the things she learned in her life in general, and especially from being on the show. And I think that even if your situation isn't exactly like hers, I think that a lot of the things she learned could apply to anyone. She also talks about her experience with, and I wrote this down because it's kind of a long name and now it's called something else. I wrote down both names. Reflex neurovascular dystrophy, which is now known as complex regional pain syndrome, which is something that she was diagnosed with as a child, and that definitely affected her dance, and that was interesting to learn about. I don't think I had ever heard of that before. She talks a bit about mental health and her experiences with being a people pleaser, and she talks about how she would suppress her emotions and try to avoid conflict, especially after growing up in that environment. She talks about the insecurities she had and gaining self-confidence. So hopefully this video gives you some of an idea of what to expect with this book, tells you some things that are in it. I will say it's not like completely in order. Like, yeah, she's not talking about her experience at college, for example, at the beginning of the book, but throughout the book, when she's talking about her time on Dance Moms, she may tell a story from something that happened on season 3, and then go to season 1 and then season 5, for example. So it's not like fully in order, but at the same time, the chapters kind of had themes, so there would be like a certain thing she'd focus on. Like, for example, I know there was one chapter that especially focused on her experiences with racism. So then she would just talk about instances she could think of that were relevant to that specific topic. So it's not terribly out of order. Like, it does start with her childhood and then the show. When it comes to the show, she kind of talks about things that happened all throughout the years, and then it goes more to the present. So I found this book pretty interesting. Definitely didn't feel hard to get through. I was pretty invested in it and learning about it, as I typically am with memoirs. I thought this was well written. and I think that it had a very hopeful and inspiring tone to it. In fact, I wrote down a couple of quotes from the book that I'd like to read, and this can also give you an idea of the way she talks / the writing style. First one is, "I want people to know that the way others view you does not define you." And that particularly resonated with me. I have had the thought that, like, it can be frustrating when other people don't understand you or they don't understand a certain thing about you, but I already have the acceptance that, like, for one, not everyone's going to, so it's kind of pointless to try to make them try. Not that you can't try to help people understand things better, I think you can and should. But I'm saying I feel like I've accepted more recently that I don't need to be fully understood and that I know who I am and I don't need other people's validation or their understanding just to confirm things I know about myself, because I think I know myself better than anyone else. So I resonated with that. The other quote is, "People are going to try to steal your joy and tear you down, but you can't let them. You have to decide over and over again that you're not going to let people dim your light and take away your shine." And she definitely experienced that quite a lot, the way she was treated and talked to on the show. So I think that was definitely one of the things that she had to relearn. And I think that for the way she was torn down so much, she seems quite confident nowadays. I mean, I'm sure she has her struggles. I'm just saying, I do think it's good how she has reframed her thinking in a lot of ways and how she has overcome that and is confident now in who she is. So I gave this 5 stars. If you've read this book, I'd love to hear your thoughts on it, or if you have any experience with the show. And thank you for watching.